Hello, future people. Welcome to Getting Tabled. I'm Jason the Bruce, and today we're returning to the Wadroon because it's time to look at those chants.
You can arrange your brushes, prepare your clippers and your knives, but sometimes no matter how many tools or paints you have, it's not enough if the dice are not on your side. Sometimes you only have one choice, and that choice is to prepare for Conquest.
Okay, yep, so this has been one that's been coming for a while. And for anyone that's been looking at the Wadroon army, I think the reason why this has taken a while is going to be fairly obvious. I can't tell you exactly when this is going to be released at this stage, but I do know that there's been a number of people asking for it. One that was hinting at it, and one that just outright asked, hey, can you do a video on this because I'm struggling. The Wadroon army is not a point-and-click army. It's not a thing of just take lots of this and then point at the enemy and the enemy will die. For the Wadroon to work, you need to have a tactical mind and you need to plan ahead. That is going to become very clear as we start looking at these things a little bit closer. And that's what we're going to do today. So, all of this information is being taken directly from the Wadroon army lists. This is available from free on the Parabellum website. It has all of the rules for the army and everything that you need to know about how to work them. The rules for the war chart are found on page 6, and you'll find them here on the screen. This is a very big part of the army. I cannot stress that enough. And the very first line of this makes that clear. One of the distinctive features of the Wadroon army is their war chart. When creating an army, each warband, including the character, must select from the following: either the cult of famine, death, or war. There are some characters that have the option to choose the cult of conquest. That is another thing in and of itself. In theory, you could do what I did in my building the army and just go, okay, I'm just going to take all of the one thing because then I don't have to think about it. The reason I said that in the video, I did explain, but I'm going to say that again. The reason I chose to take everything at the time of the same was not because I was suggesting that that's the best way to do business. It was because I was new to the game, and I know that this is something that a lot of people have struggled with. So my theory was, in my first couple of games, I'm going to take it out of the equation. It doesn't really matter if I win or lose for my first couple of games. I'm going to lose because I can't roll dice anyway. But when it comes to how to work the army, I've been looking at this for a little while. The rules are one thing, but I've also gone and checked out other people that have been doing Conquest videos as well. There's someone who chose to take Wadroon for their army on, I think it's Blitz Minis, it's Blitz something. And even in the last battle report that they did, he made a comment about how he'd really been struggling with this and kind of not setting things up properly. So this is a more difficult army if this is where you're going to start. There are some people that are just going to have the brain for this. This, however, is something that feels very, very natural to how the game is. The Wadroon are a very tribal situation. In real life, we know that those sort of tribes did tend to have war charts. We still see them today. In the most obvious example would be the Maori, when they are on the sporting field, tend to do a war chart before the game starts to intimidate the opponent. There are some Pacific Islanders that have a very similar trait. So this is something that we have seen in real life, but it's the first time I've seen it implemented in a game. And I think that might be one of the reasons why people have struggled with this. Because while you can draw comparisons, this is something that's new. I haven't seen this elsewhere like this. So, that's why I've tried to explain it the way that I have. At the beginning of your battle, select a visible place outside of the battlefield where you can place your chant markers. So you need to have a way of keeping a track of these. The Army Support Pack does have cards in it for this. Other people have just simple tokens. There's like little glass beads that you can get that people use for magic and like all sorts of things. You would just need to make very clear what colour represents what. Just buy some beads from a sewing shop and just pick out 4 different colours and use them, for example. Just so that you know exactly what it is and so that your opponent can see what's going on as well. When you draw a command card that belongs to a regiment or a character that's on the battlefield, that's very important. They need to be on the battlefield already. This does not happen while they're coming on. They must already be on the battlefield. If that regiment or character follows a cult, place one of that cult's markers in the sequence. So, when you're putting together at the start of the turn how things are going to activate, you need to be thinking about this. If there are 2 or more chant markers in the sequence, a regiment may chant the battle cry. Characters may never chant the battle cry, but they are affected by its effects as normal if they are part of a regiment chanting the battle cry. So, if I have a matriarch queen, she can't chant the battle cry, but if her regiment does, then she gets the effects of it. Unless instructed otherwise, when a regiment places a 3rd chant marker in the sequence, that regiment must immediately chant the battle cry. So this is where it comes up to everything needs to be happening for a reason. You need to be setting this up at the start of your turn. One of the downsides of this is that if your opponent throws your plan out, you need to be able to react to that. That may mean that you may need to use the battle cry before you're intending to, or you might need to go in a different direction. But you need to be able to do that if your plan doesn't work. There is something in the earlier section that I want to read as well. Unless a special rule indicates otherwise, they may never be more than 3 chant markers in the sequence. If you have reached the maximum allowed, you are required... If you've reached the maximum allowed in chant markers, you're required to place another, most commonly because the 3rd chant marker was placed by a character. Place the chant marker belonging to the cult of the activating character or regiment and discard any of the previously placed chant markers. So, I've not really planned this very well, and my 3rd activation is actually a character. That character actually happens to belong to exactly the same thing as what I've chanted. Or actually, no. Let's say I've got one cult of war, I've got one cult of death, and my character is for the cult of death. So they have to place the death token down, but they're not allowed to do the battle cry. Therefore, one of the other 2 will need to be discarded, because you're not allowed to have more than 3 unless there's something else that's told you otherwise. So in that case, obviously, I would be getting rid of the war one. Then I've got 2 deaths. Hopefully the one that's coming up next will also be death, and then we don't have any problems. Now, when you chant the battle cry, you need to follow the steps in order to chant the battle cry. You exchange the Conquest chant marker in the sequence for a Famine, Death, or War chant, if it applies, because Conquest can be changed and altered. And then you choose either chant battle cry and discard up to 3. This is going to become important in a second. Or alternatively, you can chant Conquest's Battle Cry. When you do this, discard 1 chant marker from each cult up to a maximum of 3. And then any unused chant markers are also discarded. Now, here we have a look at what we can get from this. So, Tier 1 is 2 markers. So for Famine, when the regiment would count as in... For Famine, when the regiment would count as inspired, it gains +2 clash instead of 1. For Death, the regiment gains +1 chant. +1 clash. For War, the regiment immediately performs a free rally or combat rally action, as appropriate. If the regiment was not broken, it gains the Bastion 1 draw event. So either that's a way for you to unbreak something, or you're getting Bastion. The Conquest at that level, the regiment and any characters in that regiment gains +3 march while the regiment is resolving a march action. So that's the first tier. The second tier requires you to use 3 markers. And you're going, but you're only allowed to have 3. Aha. Okay. If I discard 3 markers, for Famine, the regiment gains +2 to their charge distance. For Death, the regiment gains the Flawless Strike special rule. For War, the regiment gains +2 resolve and cleave 1 special rule until the start of its next activation. Or Conquest, the regiment gains +1 evasion. Tier 3 requires 4 markers. The thing I am not sure of at this stage is I don't understand how you can get to 4 markers, because I haven't found any rules that tell me I'm allowed to keep the extra. If we get there, and this is what we still need to work out, if we can do this together, I'd be very appreciative. Under Famine, in theory, it means that the regiment gains Flurry special rule. If the regiment already has it, then it gains +1 cleave instead. I like that because it kind of gives you a few options. For Death, the regiment gains the Deadly Blade special rule. For War, hits caused by this regiment's counterattack special rule also have the Smite special rule. If the regiment did not have counterattack special rule, it gains that special rule instead. For Conquest, you would need 1 Conquest and then 1 from each of the others. The regiment may perform an additional action. Normal rules apply. Add 1 Conquest chant marker to the sequence at the end of the regiment's activation. So that actually gives you a bonus. So they give us an example down here. The sequence has 1 Famine, 1 Death, and 1 War chant marker. A Conquest regiment activates next. As the maximum number of chant marches have been reached, a Conquest chant is placed and the player chooses to discard the Death chant marker. Then, there are 3 chant markers in the sequence. A regiment is active. That regiment must chant the Battle Cry. The regiment replaces the Conquest marker with a Famine, and now chooses a bonus from the table. As the sequence has 1 Famine and 1 War chant marker, they may only choose the Famine bonus corresponding with the 2 Famine markers that they have. They have to discard everything else. Does that make sense? This is where you need to plan things out, because ideally you would want them to all be the same so that you can get to that level 2. That's where I am with this at the moment. As I become more familiar with this, remembering that I've only been in this since November, I've been looking at this with a fresh mind quite deliberately, since November. So there's still parts of this that I'm not going to be fully across. But either I will hear from one of you that helps me figure out how to get that 4th marker, because I haven't found where you can get that from yet, or I will post a video once I've figured that out for myself. I expect that it's going to come from somebody's special ability, but I haven't found that ability yet. Clearly there's going to be something in here that tells us how to get to that 4th marker, because with the way that it's written, it tells you that you're supposed to be able to, but that you're not allowed to. And that's what I don't quite get. So, here's the thing. And I don't know if this is the answer to my question or not. Because the way that I read this, I can see where it might be my answer. But at the same time, I know something that I only read a few minutes ago. Scion of Conquest has a spell called Crescendo. Crescendo targets yourself, and it's got a casting difficulty of 4. You add a conquest marker to the sequence, then you reveal your command card. If it belongs to a regiment, draw that command card and the regiment activates immediately. Otherwise, return it to the top of the stack, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Now, with the way that we were reading things earlier, if you place something and you're going to have too many, then you're supposed to discard something. But maybe because of the way that this is worded, it's being placed and then the other thing's coming in and calling it, and that's how you're getting your 4? Maybe? I need to clarify on this, and I'm going to try and get an answer on this before I put this video live. And if I do, there will be a follow-up to this. And I'm going to be leaving this in because I want to make it clear that I have done that. But the big question people had was how to implement this properly. And I think it comes into two different trains of thought. One of those things is remembering to get into the habit of actually putting down your markers and not losing track of them. In your first couple of games, even if you followed my advice and do the whole I'm only going to concentrate on one thing, still make a point of remembering that, because that will get you into the habit. Keep the markers in front of you. Place them next to you where you're drawing your card so that you see them as you're pulling that card out. And it becomes a visual key as a reminder. Keep them next to the cards that you're drawing. And then obviously keep the actual sequence to the side, wherever it is that you place it, so that they can't be confused. So that way when you pull out your Scion of Conquest, you remember to grab your Conquest marker and add it to the sequence. Or your whatever. If you know what you're facing, you can have a look at this table and you can figure out the things that you think you're going to be aiming for. And then obviously implementing them into your list when you're building it. If you're approaching a tournament where you can't necessarily know that, then you're going to want to have multiple things there to try and do that. And then at the beginning of your turn, when you're building your stack, trying to place them in the order that's going to be the most useful. This is something that is going to be a learning curve, but when it comes to trying to figure out how to do this properly, there's two trains of thought. Now, obviously, in theory, the more markers you have, the more powerful advantage that you're going to get. But that doesn't mean that the tier 1 stuff is not worth looking at. Looking at Famine, just as an example. You get 2 Famine markers. When the regiment would count as inspired, it gains +2 clash instead of +1. That's something that could be extremely useful. If you don't have something that's inspired, death gives you +1 clash automatically. It's still really good. You get to have free rally cries under war, bringing yourself back from being broken. These are all things that are very, very helpful. It's just a matter of knowing when to risk leaving it so you can save it, and when to use it. Even when we get our answer for that tier 3, I would be arguing that that's not something you're going to be aiming for all the time. At best, you're probably only pulling that out 2 or 3 times a game. Most of the time, you're going to be getting stuff out of these first 2 tiers. And every time you want to save for that last tier, you're going to be facing a risk. Because if I know that you're going for one of those tier 3 things, and it's potentially going to cause trouble for me, the first thing I'm going to do is try and attack that thing that you're relying on to get you that last marker. Because I'd be really stupid not to do that. So there's multiple levels to this. You're not going to get this in your first go. It's going to take you multiple games. If you're going into a tournament situation, this is going to be where you're going to want to set aside with a friend and get some games in. Because the only way you're going to be able to find your rhythm is by getting the practice in. A lot of this, in theory, is very easy to get your head around. The hard part is doing it. Create an easy way for you to do this yourself without having to remember. Whether that be that you have the cards that you can use as your marker, or your coloured beads, or whatever it is that you're using, try to create a way where you can't forget to do this and have to try and play catch up. Because if you start doing that, you've already lost it. Get into the habit of remembering this. When you're going into a game, read through the table a couple of times. And hey, you know what? Your opponent's not going to mind you having this to the side. Honestly, they're not going to mind. They're going to have things that they need to remember as well. It's not like keeping rules aside when you're trying to learn an army for the first time is something that's unusual. I mean, yes, we've all come across that person. But don't plan your games across a person that's difficult to play with. Most people are very nice people. So don't be afraid to take your time with it. Don't be afraid to keep this open. And don't be afraid to pull this out and say to your person that you're playing with, hey, I just need to check this for a minute and make sure I'm doing it right. Try to create a situation where it's something you don't have to think about. By setting things out with your markers in a way that's easy, you won't have to think about it because it'll be right there in front of you. And you'll eventually start doing it without even really thinking about it. But they may also notice something that you didn't. And at the end of your game, hey, let's do that whole thing about, is there anything you noticed that I could have done better? You know that one thing that we're always supposed to do and we never do? I need to do that more. And I suspect that you do as well. Well, I'm back, folks. I managed to find the answer to the last question that I had, which was how to get back to the tier 3. I'd like to thank Reese from the Discord server for answering my question, because it was something that I was really struggling to find. And given that I'd specifically been asked this question, I wanted to actually answer the actual question. So, let's go across. So the question that we've come across is a special rule that hasn't come up in any of the videos that we've spoken about so far, because it's mainly used in a unit that hasn't been released yet. Fanatic. When a regiment with this special rule chooses a tier bonus due to Chant the Battle Cry, it always counts as having discarded from the sequence an additional chant marker belonging to their cult, to a maximum of 4. But they may only choose their own cult's bonuses. So again, if you're going to be trying to save up for the tier 3, there's going to be a risk involved, which is that you need to make sure that you've set this up properly and that your opponent doesn't screw around with your plans. But then you'd only be able to choose their cult. So whether it be the Chosen of Conquest, the Chosen of Death, the Chosen of War, or the Chosen of Famine. So that's how you get there. Something else that can be useful, but is not the answer to the tier 3, is the Drum Beast. And unfortunately, this is another creature that's not yet available. But I'm going to show you the creature very quickly. We'll go into this in more detail when I cover them at a later stage. But they have an ability called the Cult Shrine. It's an option that you can take, which would mean that you're following the Cult of Conquest and that they use the Warchant rules. However, they also have an ability to gain the Drumbeat draw event, and this is more important, and I'll show you why in a second. So that would mean that you would have the sound of drums as well as the Drumbeat. So let's have a look at what they actually do. So, sound of drums. For the remainder of the turn, you may keep as many chant markers in the sequence as you can place, and you can only discard the chant markers you used when chanting the battle cry. Additionally, your regiments are not obligated to chant the battle cry. It is always optional. At the end of the turn, discard down to 3 chant markers. On top of that, you also get Drum Beat. Add 1 chant marker that matches the cult of any chant marker already in sequence. So, it's stopping you from having to discard things and is allowing you to add a chant marker of any cult. That's going to make getting to that point a lot easier. But you need to take advantage of this because at the end of the turn, you have to discard down to 3. That's the important part here. If we don't have these yet, how can we take advantage of this? I think the obvious thing would be to count as, but if you want to try this out, here is my genuine advice. You're going to have to do this with friends because you're not going to be able to do this in a tournament because the model doesn't exist yet. I would be picking some sort of model that is very clearly not belonging to anything else. So I would not be counting your general infantry or characters or anything like that. I would be finding something, if you want it to make it look like it belongs, sure, that's fine. But either pinch some models from another game so that it's just very clearly something that doesn't belong, so that it can't be confused with anything else. Because the last thing that you want is your opponent to be thinking that you're playing games. Make it very clear what you're doing and why, because this is something you want to try, it's something that's very important, these aren't out yet, etc, etc, etc. And they're not, you can't buy them. So, the rules exist, but you can't buy them. So, a friend shouldn't have any issues with you doing this here. You're not going to be able to do this at a tournament though. Otherwise, prepare for the future. We don't know when these are coming yet. They will be coming at some point, but we don't know when that's going to be. If you're interested in getting into Conquest or expanding your existing force, either use the QR code on screen or the link in the description to open the Parabellum website, and when you're asked if you have a discount voucher, enter Getting Tabled without spaces, just like you see on your screen, to receive 10% off your order. In doing so, not only will you save money, but you also help support our channel without any cost to you. Thank you very much to anyone who chooses to do that. It's greatly appreciated. You're helping us improve our content and bring more content to you. Thank you very much for checking out this video. If you're enjoying the content of this channel, please like and subscribe. If you're in a position to do so, please check out patreon.com/gettingtabled. You receive early access to at least 80% of all videos that we put out, and you get access to the video edition of all of our podcasts the day that they're uploaded. If you'd like to check us out on social media, facebook.com/gettingtabled is the most active. We also have a Discord server. You can email our team at gettingtabled@gmail.com. If you're on either Twitter or Instagram, you can find us at gettingtabled. And until next time, play more games. Hello, future people. Set things up properly, Jason.